organisations do. Do we know what to ask? I think this might be something that I'd like to actually take up a little bit more in the Learning and Skills Group community as well, about what questions to be asking of our learners as well, because obviously we haven't necessarily got very many of those. I'm just going to leave you with a couple of case studies, really, of thinking about the fact that we need to ask the right question of the right people. And for me, one of the questions that we need to ask is, how can I help you do your job better? But I think one of the questions that we tend to ask is, what do you think of what you've just done? We even ask people, what do you want? And people don't always know what they want. And I think that's a really important question to avoid after naming this seminar, what learners want. I don't think that's the right question to ask them, but we need to be asking them instead, how can we help you do your job better? And perhaps approaching it with a blank sheet of paper. Many of you know Nick Shackleton-Jones. I love his work, and a lot of us talk about from courses to resources, and Nick's care curve, and you can Google Nick and the care curve and see videos of him. He talks about, what do learners really care about? Sort of like what's important to them, what's emotionally that connection. And if you Google his blog, A Conventional, and a blog title, We Have a Wheel, We Build a Cart, you actually see the detail there behind how he's really applied that thinking into the redesign of the Bupa induction program, where they ditched the formal training needs analysis and brought people together, not personas, not ideas, not creating something and then taking it back to people, but structured inquiry groups of individuals who've been in the organisation for 6 months and said, what concerned you? What did you need to know? What did you wish to know? And as a result of that, they were able to map different media to each of these and come up with a portal of different types of resources, one of which, the most popular, was a 3-month checklist that they were able to go through and just work through that checklist. So that's one example of actually going out and asking, and the influence and impact that it has then made on that induction program. And so I definitely recommend that you read Nick's blog on that. Craig's mentioned earlier, and Craig's here in the middle of a journey at the moment, not looking at a particular program, but Bupa International are looking at their overall strategy. Where do they need to be taking their learning technology strategy? We've been working with them for a little while, and what they're doing is actually using the Towards Maturity Learner Audit, which Craig hates the name. He calls it the Learner Survey, so that's fine. But to actually go out independently and confidentially and ask those questions as a tool to help make the right case for the right media and methods inside the organisation as well as an overall strategy. And there's been a very proactive campaign to engage people with this process. And really, it's only been going on. It's really a work in progress. And Craig, being Craig, is blogging about the different steps of his journey at this logo below. But just one of the things that we found out just by looking at a little bit of the data, as Craig mentioned earlier, is that those people who were in the operations side of the business were using very different tools and techniques and finding them useful to those, for example, in the support side of the business. So this is just one small finding, that if we hadn't have asked these types of questions, and we're going to be building up a picture and a map of what the individuals and learners are actually doing right now to get their job done better in order to be able to support the ongoing learning strategy. So there's just a couple of examples to use. So just in summary, because I don't want to take up too much of the time, and I'm sure there's been a lot of questions going here. This is my Mel Gibson's guide to what learners want. To summarise some of the things that we've been talking about today. First of all, don't be an ass, really, to really be brave and say, okay, what am I basing my thinking on? Is it assumptions? Or is it actual facts? And just to be clear on that, don't rely on labels that you're putting on or that other people are putting on, because potentially they might mask the individual. I think someone was saying, that millennials in their organisation aren't that keen on sharing. So we shouldn't be relying on labels, because our organisation and culture may be completely different to somebody else's. then obviously that leads us on to the fact that we need to be moving into a process of discovery. We don't have to have the lightning bolt and have our minds opened up, but if we ask the right questions of the right people, then that will really help us to note down and discover more about our learners. And I think the other thing about that when we're asking is that we need to listen. And I think that went back to Dave's point about earlier. You know, we can ask, but if we don't listen and say, okay, well, what does that mean? And how would that influence our thinking? Then actually it's a fruitless exercise. So I would say that we definitely have to listen with no preconceived plan. And then just picking up on a theme to really act on what we find out. So I'm sorry, no rocket science there, but something I feel incredibly passionate about. I think we've got the most fantastic opportunity, and I think we need to find out what learners want, what our learners want, what not everybody else's, the ones that we have to support. And I think the challenge is that we need to find out more. So I'm going to leave it at that. You can obviously contact me. You can find out about our learner audit there, but the challenge I'd like to leave with you all is to find out more. Don, I'm going to hand back to you. Hopefully that was provoked a little bit of discussion there.
But it provoked plenty of discussion. Strangely, fewer questions than we'd normally get in one of these sessions, but a lot of discussion, plenty of chat going on, as you can see, plenty of reflection, indeed, around the issues. And I think the list of questions, can we just go back one moment to the previous slide, Laura? I think that slide, I said at the beginning, was Laura going to unveil the secret source of what learners really want? Of course, I knew the answer was that she wasn't going to, not because she wants to be mean, but simply because
you just can't.
you can't. And if you could, then there'd probably be something wrong, because you'd be suggesting that learners the world over are entirely the same, which, if I'm reading you correctly, Laura, is of course entirely wrong. They are different, and the context is crucial. Teresa said this is a more useful session than I anticipated. Thank you. Well, I'm glad it was useful. I'm sorry that you didn't anticipate that it might be useful. But there were some very, very useful questions that came up. Let's go back to your contact details, Laura, because I think that's terribly useful. A couple of questions came up. I think Craig has just dealt with this, but John Allen said, does the survey include interviewing the managers of the learners? Can you just tell us if it does at the moment, and if not, are there plans to in the future?
Well, we believe very strongly that managers are learners, and so it's designed for absolutely everybody, and everybody's encouraged to engage with it because they are an individual at work in the workplace. Now, what we obviously identify is who of those have got managerial or director responsibility, so that allows us to then compare their responses with other people's. Because if we find that in your organisation actually there's a culture of the way that managers learn in a particular way, that, for example, may influence the way that personally, the other people feel supported. So including managers in the heart of this process is so vital from our perspective, not as a manager, getting a manager's perspective, but getting their perspective as an individual, as a learner.
Well, can I just be provocative and say, don't you want their perspective as managers as well? Wouldn't that be useful?
Well, what we do, obviously with the core program, it's the online survey so that people can get back that information. But we also work with focus groups too, and then we look at managers individually, because it's very helpful then to uncover, what it is that those managers are thinking. And we often find that when we do focus group work, people are very happy to tell you because you don't work there, they're not offending you. So it's got that independence, that confidentiality side of things also does help us uncover those types of areas.
I do think the Lightbulb Joe is giving you a big thumbs up, saying Laura asks very insightful questions in the focus groups. Laura is, I will say this, not just because she's a chum and a good egg, but she is very good facilitator and is very good at disarmingly asking good questions. Other questions that came up, Laura, data, etc. Oh, I must say, it's very funny. Beth said, do we know where that data comes from? I said, well, it's from Laura's research. The link will be available at the end. And she said, oh, it's okay. I think I've got the infographic. I think that's a wonderful phrase. I've got the infographic. That's the new way of saying you've caught some information.
Yeah. And I would say the infographic is brilliant. I love it. But the detail in the actual research report will give you an awful lot more to base your business case on. So it's worth downloading the report as well, because we particularly looked at 7 challenges that people are looking at the moment and looking at those top learners. So it's both worth having a look at the overall report as well.
And you're stimulating a lot of discussion here. For example, Dom saying, look, some learners, this is actually very common. Some learners want to get away from their desks to avoid distractions, and organisations nonetheless seem to be closing their learning centres.
Yeah.
But we can discuss all this stuff.
Yeah.
Stephanie's thrown something.
And that's why we need to get the facts on the table. We need to get those facts on the table. Yeah. And your organisation, Dom, may be some completely different from other people's organisations as well. Physical environment to your staff may be completely different because of the culture of the business to another. And that's why it's so important. People said to us, why don't you do a learner survey for everybody? And for us, it's absolutely critical that it's for an individual organisation, because your organisation will be different to other people's. The good thing about working across the board in this way is that we can start to gather a lot of data and see whether or not there are any trends across it. But the important thing is what you do with your data and how you change.
With your data and with your people.
Yeah.
Let's jump very quickly back to, you're talking about the report. Olaf asked, the report is obviously available, but is the raw data available for download? I don't think anyone's asked that question before, but is it, Laura?
No, the raw data isn't available for download.
I'm not surprised. It's rather an important asset. Runar says, now I think this is quite a controversial statement. People have been agreeing with it. I'm ambivalent. Runar says, I think it becomes more and more important to become somewhat of an SME, a subject matter expert, in order to understand the learner need. I'm guessing, Runar, that what you're talking about here is an expert in the domain of how people work, the subject matter that people are working about. So if you're in a publishing house, you know about publishing. So, Laura, do you want to reflect on that?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that we don't necessarily have to become an expert, but we need to know how the experts themselves respond in that space. Because we can't necessarily become an expert in everything. And one of the things that I think is really important in understanding your learners is to understand the extent to which they need or want structure and guidance in that learning process. We said up front, people have a real challenge with time. And actually just giving them lots and lots of things that they can just quickly draw on, that may not be what your staff are looking for. And I think so our expertise in learning design, the most appropriate learning design on helping people to find the right things at the right place at the right time in a way that's relevant and meaningful to them, I think actually is a skill set that needs to be finely honed, rather than just say actually the skill set is more the subject matter experts. So I still think we need to be expert in our field. I
think I have a problem with the E. I think if we could become experts, then we wouldn't be in L&D. I think our level of expertise is definitely in learning. But on the other hand, it's absolutely the case that we have to have domain knowledge. We have to know about what we're talking about. Otherwise, really, it's just daft.
Yeah.
Now, look, Stephanie works for BP, and she says we've got some people who, and she actually tweeted earlier that she wasn't coming, so I'm glad you could make it.
Yeah.
They've got people all over the world in different locations. Some people on desk jobs, you can get to those easily. But how do you reach with the survey, Laura? How do you make sure you're getting a good sample data from across your organisation, including those that don't normally answer this? In other words, it's not a skewed survey with a biased population.
Yeah.
You want it to be truly representative.
Absolutely.
What techniques do you use for that, Laura?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that we've been working with, and we've done in the past, as I say, we've done a lot of this work in the past, is the role of focus groups that don't necessarily need to be done face-to-face, can be done online as well, particularly with focus groups that include managers or supervisors in that, so that we then kind of connect with them, they understand the importance of what's happening, they understand it from their own perspective, and are then able to then give a commitment to say, well, yes, I will also then commit to working with my staff to make sure that this takes place. So that's just one of the techniques that could be used in that process.
Quick question and a quick point of reflection. Rosa asks, hello, where can we find the infographic? very good point. I haven't got the URL to hand.
Yes, I think we might have tweeted it out during the session. So the infographic itself will be at towardsmaturity.org. If you click on the research tab, skim down there, you'll see the infographic there.
There we are. Okay.
And also a whole heap of other reports that you may or not have.
Actually, I may have it here because I've just gone to your tweet. I'm going to copy the shortcut and just drop it in. So try this one, Rosa. I hope that brings you good luck. Now, quickly, Charles Jennings. Welcome, Charles. Another late joiner today. Quick point. He says, and he and Inga are having a conversation about what do we actually call these people? Do we call them learners? Do we call them workers?
Yes.
What do we call them?
I know.
Any thoughts?
And
it's a bit of a barbed question, isn't it?
I think you're absolutely right. And Charles knows me well and knows that we would have really struggled with this one ourselves. We believe that what we're talking about is our staff and our employees. But if we say we're actually doing an employee survey, a staff survey, then suddenly there'll be a confusion with individuals about what we're trying to achieve. So that's why, with great reluctance, we kind of stuck with the concept of a learner survey, learner audit. But I think we need to really, Charles knows that I feel passionately about this as well. The fact that these people are doctors, they're nurses, they're contact centre staff, they're salespeople. They don't consider themselves as learners unless they are in a formal institution, educational institution. So just clarification there. So I think that's a really important part. But at the same time, we need to understand when we're asking these questions that we want to find out how they learn what they need to do their job better, and that's the heart of this.
In asking these questions, Andy H says, if you ask people what they want, they often don't know.
Yes, exactly, I agree.
Now, so I think asking people what they want is, or even worse than that, is asking the managers what they think people should have.
Yeah.
So,
definitely not.
But you have the question. You have this range of questions which you suggest we use to draw out from people.
Yes. Anybody can do something like this, but the reason we've looked at it is because we believe it's really important to help people with their benchmarking and becoming top learning organisations. So we've used the 10 years of work on top learning companies to design this process, and we focus in on what it is that they need to do their job and what they are currently doing to do their job better, that we might not even know about, or might even be illegal in their organisation.
Yeah, that may be a question as well. Sam Burrows said he prefers to use the word users.
Yep.
I only like employees because everybody, like it or not, is an employee. Well, actually, that's not the case in the extended enterprise.
Yeah.
But they may be an associate of some sort.
And again, this is an individual thing. So, obviously I don't want to be just talking about what we're doing in this space at the moment, but what we have is a framework, and we believe it's really important that that framework is then used and applied into an organisation. So learners doesn't work, we use some other word. We know what we're talking about, but what we want is to make sure that the organisation we're connecting with knows what we're talking about as well.
Quick reflection here from Karen Rowley. He says, Karen is a former teacher, we're in a massive period of change from teacher-centric to learner-centric learning, and until schools and colleges have established best way forward, I think you're going to encounter this mismatch.
Yeah.
I do believe it's very much an issue. Karen, what's your thought on that one, Laura?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and what we have seen in our work in the past is that this information about learners, about wanting to kind of be completely learner-centric. John and I had a big discussion before this, whether we talked about learner-centric learning in this, but having them empowered to do whatever, it's not necessarily what people were wanting in the workplace at the moment. They haven't got the time to be that empowered, but equally they do want to be supported. It's getting that right balance, that interim balance, that I think is really important, which is why it's so important that we actually base our solutions on where our situation is right now, rather than sort of a promise of the future.
Yes, or something we imagine, again, the business of assumptions. Runar says, Laura, do you think there's a different approach if the learners are people outside your own organisation? I think this is to take two angles on this one. Firstly, how do you get the data? So if you're surveying, how do you do about it, drawing on Stephanie's point? And then secondly, do you think that actually you're going to pull out different data anyway as a result of it being an extended enterprise?
You may do. I'm not going to make any assumptions on
You don't
that.
lead the witness.
I really am not. I really couldn't make the assumptions. It's going to be then dependent on your channel partner, your extended enterprise culture, and everything else. Does your culture flow into their culture, or is it different? These are the sorts of things that asking the right questions will give you those answers, and it will give you a much broader perspective on which to base your decisions than just purely looking at what we think things will be. That's why it's so important to find out, I think. Sorry, I'm not giving the definitive answer.
Laura, if there were definitive answers, I'm sure they would have been answered some time ago, so let's not beat ourselves up about that. I'm just also watching the discussion here, and Stephanie and others are discussing this business of getting out and getting in touch with people. My view is that somebody somewhere in the organisation almost certainly already has a communication mechanism with them, although Connor has just pointed out the majority of our people have just turned off reading corporate emails, and it's true, actually. There are organisations which are stopping using internal corporate email, but in lieu of that, there will be some other way of getting hold of people. Even if, Stephanie, the people on oil rigs, somebody will have a mechanism. And I think for me, I always try to go with the people. I always try to jump on the bandwagon of the communication if it's already in place, rather than try and reinvent it. I feel sure there must be something there. Just laughing quickly at Lightbulb Joe saying this new technology is definitely worth a loo, and then corrected herself to say that was worth it.
Yeah, but I think one of the things that this is raising, and I think it's as valid in this discussion as it is in the discussion of how do we engage learners with the solutions that we're creating, is that we need to have a very thorough communication stakeholder plan. It's a subject I'm sure I've covered on another seminar about the top learning organisations. It's still a characteristic of them today as it was a few years ago, is the way that they connect and engage with stakeholders, including those that will help them achieve their jobs. So internal comms people and all of that kind of thing. It's about removing the silos that we tend to put ourselves in, either because we're too busy or maybe we're too afraid or to put our heads above the parapet, but to remove the silos and to work in partnership with all aspects of the business to be able to drive it forward.
Stephanie's rolling her eyes at me and saying you have to be super important to use the mechanisms that reach the entire business here. Exclamation mark, bracket, she doesn't write it. For goodness sake, ma'am, she doesn't write. I would say L&D is super important, so wind Nick up and tell him to go and fight a battle there on that one. Okay, lots of stuff going on here about the, again, about education and the way education is overlapping with and increasingly influencing what's taking place at work.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that one, Laura?
Again, we need to find that out, and that's it's a very important area for us. Is I have. How are people actually developing their own skills out of work? When we did this research a while back, something like 3,000 learners took it part overall, and we were quite staggered at the number of individuals who were actually using some kind of technology-enabled learning to build their skills completely outside the remit of the organisation, and things are changing all the time, and I think it's going to be very interesting now to see whether people are kind of connecting with formal education outside of work through things like MOOCs and stuff like that. I think it's a really important time for us to be aware of our staff.
Absolutely, and MOOCs. They're a symptom, but they are a massive symptom of a huge changes that's taking place, and will revolutionise what we do in the next 2 years. Everyone in this call, guaranteed, you're going to be either working with or competing with some form of higher education within the next 12 months.
Absolutely.
It's going to happen.
And they're getting smarter.
Gosh.
About connecting directly with employers, and some really interesting and useful solutions on that. And that's why I love to go to Learning Technologies, but I also love to go to Online Educa in Berlin, where the two worlds are merging together to stimulate that thinking.
Sorry, I was listening to you. I took my eye off the chat for a second there, Laura. It's not my job. Although I have to say, actually, the time is moving on. We should probably wrap up. There we go. You see, and Beth says, look, we're going to advertise a MOOC to all our staff starting in April. What can we lose? Question mark. That's it. It's a low risk game at the moment. It's going to be a higher risk game when the big players are established, and I think if we ignore that, we're absolutely sticking our heads in the sand. But anyway, that's a subject of a topic for a webinar for the future. Right now, what we've had is Laura not revealing what learners want, of course, but showing us the ways in which we can go out and find it. And actually, it was all wrapped up, I think, earlier on by Jonathan Winter said, "Thank you, Laura. The key message is really appreciated. Listen to the learner and respond." There we go. That's rather well put.
Thank you. I should contact you next time I need to write my summary slide.
Yes, and look, there's Laura saying, please do email if you want any more information. Yes, and look, I want to say thank you very much to everybody who's participated on the call. Lots and lots of chat. And also, I do like calls like this, webinars like this, where we've had lots of great facts, lots of great insight from Laura, combined with a lot of great conversation, carrying on in the chat and with Laura responding to what people are saying on the hoof. Great job, Laura. I feel torn. I want to see both this slide, which has got your contact details, and of course the previous slide with the questions on it. But people, you don't have to worry. You can have your you can have your cake and eat it, because of course everything will be available via the magic of the LSG website. Now, to really put the icing on the cake of the technical issues we've had today with the webinar, which were compounded by my delayed arrival from the States this morning. Halfway through, as we were recording, I was typing something. I hit a keystroke and it stopped recording. I know. I then started recording it again. So I'm hoping I'll be able to merge those two together. Look, some great comments coming through here. Sarah Perrett says, "Thank you, Laura. Very inspiring." I would agree, absolutely inspiring. And I think that it shows us that there may not be a silver bullet or a single answer, but there are ways of getting there, and that's great. Olaf, cheers and toodles to you too. If you've enjoyed it, tell the world about it. Laura, do you want to drop your Twitter handle into the chat area? It's Laura Overton. Use the hashtag #LSG webinar. The magic of the Learning and Skills Group means that Laura's recording, or one part of it, or two parts of it, depending on what happened and whether I can merge them together, will be available afterwards. Certainly the PDF of the slides will be, and I think, Laura, what I might do is just pull those questions out and put them in as a separate topic in there, so that we've got the questions to hand, easy to see.
Yeah, and the chat gets recorded as well, doesn't it?
The chat gets recorded as well. I've never tried recording the cat, but that would be interesting, but not terribly useful. Our next webinar is in 2 weeks' time, on the 21st of March, and I look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, it just remains for me once again to say thanks very much to everybody for coming along, participating, sharing your insights and thoughts, and of course once again to Laura, who not only tells a good story, but also, crucially, has the data to build it on, thanks to what she's been doing for the last 10 years. Laura, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, and thanks for such an enjoyable session this morning, and for everyone's passion about this subject.
Indeed, the passion is strong. Guys, thanks very much. Hope to see you all on the 21st. Bye for now.